Hello, my name is Helen Dalking, and my slideshow presentation is about resources and support for sexual minority youth that suffer from oppression and abuse. This is for Professor Olson, Technical Writing Instructor at Heritage University, Wapato, Washington, and today is April 21st. Introduction I want to start out with talks about people who identify themselves as LGBTQ should have access to the same resources and support as other minority populations. Sometimes they are referred to as a sexual minority because those abbreviations mean lesbian, gay, bi, trender, and questioning, people who are trying to understand their sexual identity. So my research went into the issues of environmental and social factors that contribute to socio-emotional disorders, physical abuse and criminalization of survival, it addressed the needs of sexual minorities and needs stable housing and advocacy programs to provide support for sexual minority youth that suffer through the crisis balance of homelessness or suicide. In my data selection of my research, I found that a lot of these youth had problems growing up. They grew up a little differently than children from the sexual majority. That says that home and community environments can lead to feelings that put most sexual minority youth at risk for homelessness or suicidal behaviors. So it means where they are at can bring up lots of issues. There's lots of problems with suicide deaths and suicidal behaviors. And most of the time, some of these youth end up homeless. Factors of abuse from homes and communities, maybe including schools, encompass harassment, oppression, or neglect. And they also considers the level of cultural climate of acceptance in schools and communities. So if a LGBTQ youth goes to a school that's more accepting, they don't normally suffer from the deep suicidal problems. But what if their home life was really abusive too? They still might be at risk for homelessness. There's many variables that can be factors that will put a youth at risk. More data. So some of the risks of homelessness include experiencing life on the streets forms a cycle of the need for protection and assistance. They're all by themselves. They're going to try to make friends, right? So they'll find mentors or become part of a family group that helps them survive. Victimization from shelter members and facilitators sometimes agitate this problem. They could, people always say like, oh, why don't they go to a shelter? They can get help there. But if you're a sexual minority, it's not always an accepting place for you. They also suffer from mental and physical health issues. So if they're on the streets and they have these problems, they may not be getting the treatment that they need. They're not seeing doctors regularly. If they need medications, they're not making appointments or going to clinics to get their medications, or they could be confiscated or sold or taken away from them. Substance abuse can happen before a youth is homeless or considering issues of suicide problems. It also is an effect of being homelessness and mental instability from the conditions of trying to take care of yourself in the streets. STDs, and especially HIV, are also a problem. And they talked about in some research about transgender youth face this problem a lot because of the situation that sometimes happens and criminalization. If a youth is found with condoms on the streets, they are automatically accused of prostitution or sex trafficking. And so just surviving on the streets makes them criminals if they are found. There's also issues with healthcare. If an LGBT youth was trying to get services, medical and mental health institutions show many biases and insensitive treatments, and a lot of the times there's an inaccessibility of the resources. One of the resources I found was a newspaper article from students at YBCC. Obviously, these students are not at risk for homelessness, but some of them might be facing the problems of mental health leading towards suicide, even if they are going to school and going to college, if they don't feel comfortable in their body, especially with transgender issues of wanting to switch to the opposite gender. There's not a lot of resources in the valley that they could go to. If they do get one part of the treatment, they might have to go to another country to continue to get hormone placements or different kinds of procedures. So there's a high complexity of services that the youth need to do to keep up their performance, or if they're homeless, they need help with their medical conditions. And keeping appointments is not easy when you're suffering from depression and fear and surviving on the streets. So that talks about the inaccessible healthcare facilities. A lot of our institutions, you can go to drug treatment for one place and get your mental health diagnosis in another place, and go to a shelter in another part of town. But those things are so spread out that a lot of time it's dangerous to travel from place to place. In bigger cities, that's more of a problem, I would assume, than here in Yakima. We're not too spread out. There's a lot of lack of cooperation between a diagnosis and medical coverage. You have to be diagnosed with a certain title to be able to get medical coverage from some of those things. And a lot of the youth don't like the label of a disorder to explain just them wanting to feel comfortable in their own body and being themselves. Need for culturally sensitive practitioners is a huge need. A lot of doctors are not educated about how to talk to a transgender youth about what their needs are, or even a homosexual or lesbian youth. Their sexual needs also need to be taken care of, and a lot of people don't like talking about that stuff. So there's also institutional oppression. The research I found said that worldwide policies are often unfair or under-enforced to protect sexual minorities against biases and civil rights violations. The United States isn't quite as bad. There's a lot of reform that's helping protect the rights of sexual minorities. In some countries, anything they do, from wearing different clothes to engaging in sex acts, is criminalized. So a lot of the institutions, child welfare tends to tell children who get into foster care or transitional housing to just keep it under the radar and not cause problems. Foster families are also the same risk factors as your custodial parents if they don't accept what's going on in your life. Shelters are not always sensitive to supporting the rights of sexual minorities. Again, medical and mental health services or biases, or the inadequacy of services. Law enforcement kind of prey on these youth. They know that they need help. They seem to be in the game of criminalizing people instead of helping them. Corporations have strict policies on what people are supposed to wear or how they're supposed to do their hair. And I think this is an infringement on people's rights. And state and national policies have been changing. So this is the United States renewed the Violence Act Against Women, which that act covers funding for anti-domestic violence efforts, especially named the LGBTQ population as eligible for services, and for the agencies that serve them to collect and analyze data about whether or not they experience domestic violence. That ensure will show the need for programs to help. Summary of environmental risk factors. This is the visual I have. Starts off here with the target population and sexual minority youth. Here's a summary of some environments that they face in their life. Poor home environments, poor school or community environments, biased medical or mental health practitioners, unfair or under-enforced policies. These are some of the outcomes that they could have in each environment. In your home, it could be an unacceptance of your identity, verbal or physical abuse. At schools, they suffer from bullying and harassment. And sometimes there's just a cultural climate of discrimination, especially with curriculum and not making it part of human development to talk about these feelings. In the medical field, treatment difficulties and inaccessible resources can really make a transgender person or someone trying to receive mental health for just being themselves. It's not easy being told that you're wrong when you feel so sick about trying to be yourself. Unfair and under-enforced policies, agencies and institutional biases can occur, and civil rights violations happen all the time. So among these four environments, these are the contributing factors that can lead to homelessness. And oftentimes homelessness can bring about suicidal actions, but they can also, from these environments, just go straight to performing suicidal actions that lead to death. So I consider this a crisis status. These youth need help, and programs need to facilitate that. Supportive interventions. This is called PAVE. It's a coalition that helps protect the rights of children in school. So you can contact your Washington PAVE agency, and they will contact you. Like if they do have a good, stable home, the parents are trying to help them, but the schools is what's causing the crisis status. You can get help through PAVE. GSA is called the Gay and Straight Alliance. So it's a support group and alliance structures in the schools that help create a culture of acceptance and understanding and support. Acceptance shelters are shelters where they are more protected against hate crimes and bullying in the shelters. Transitional living programs that are also accepting of the needs for sexual minorities. And host homes is another program that sexual minority youth can use to help get them out of the cycle of homelessness. Preventive support. This is the visual. We want to help with crisis prevention. So here's some preventative support. Support groups, Gay Straight Alliance, and PAVE. And then most of the programs we say there are a lot more intervention programs where youth already are living in the streets or have already had problems with suicide. And this is a family acceptance project for foster kids to try to get back in with their family and provide family support and education. Try to reunite families. acceptance shelters again. So this is how it's organized. These are under intervention programs. But we really need to see more preventive support. What the conclusion gets into. My analysis was to help construct a support group curriculum for social workers to use in a therapy setting. So we need to construct preventative models to help with environmental factors for crisis status, helping the youth understand themselves a lot better. The National Alliance to End Homelessness helps with that cycle of homelessness. Like, some kids may have dropped out, and some of the kids, they grow up and they're trying to find jobs, and they either are not getting their rights protected and discriminated against, or they don't have the education. So that helps them kind of build up the resources they need to end the cycle of homelessness. And preventative measures would be screening tests in schools. If children are suffering in grades or emotional conflicts or mental conflicts, they can do the screening test under the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And there's lots of intervention programs, but there needs to be more, along with support groups that help empower youth, provide them with knowledge about legal services and understanding their self-identity, so they can really be advocates for themselves. So we need culturally sensitive communities. Specialized programs, policies, and support systems empower and enable advocacy for sexual minority youth. The more they understand about themselves and what the laws are and how to protect themselves, they can stand up for themselves and say, this is not okay, and you're not going to get away with it. That includes these environments of family, schools, welfare agencies, and other agencies of health,